Welcome back to 6-Minute Math, where we turn confusion into clarity 6 minutes at a time. Thank you for joining us today for our video on factoring simple trinomials, the extended version. Make sure you're subscribed to 6-Minute Math for more tips, tricks, hints, and hacks to make your math journey easier. We will not have a time limit today as we are doing an extended version, and I want to give ample time to make sure all of you understand this process of factoring simple trinomials. So let's look at our key points here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a factor u of that c value in my trinomial. If you are unfamiliar with what a factor u is, be sure to check out our video here at 6-Minute Math called What is a Factor to help you with that process. After we have that factor u, we're going to find two numbers that add or subtract to that b value. How are we going to know whether we are looking for two numbers that add or subtract? Well, we are actually going to look at our c value to tell us. After we have those two numbers, we're going to create our binomial factors using our variable and each of the values we have found previously. So let's check out an example here. We're going to factor x squared plus 7x plus 12, and we're going to create our factor u for that c value. Which one is that c value? Well, we have our a, b, and c, and that c value is 12. Our factor u for 12 looks as such. And we're going to look for two numbers that add. We're going to look at that c operation to our b value of 7. Which two numbers add to 7? Well, that's going to be 3 and 4. And using the variable of x and those two numbers, we're going to have our binomial factors of x plus 3 and x plus 4. So let's do some examples together. We're going to factor x squared plus 17x plus 30. So the first thing we need to do is create our factor u. So we have 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. We look at our c operation of adding. So we're looking for two numbers that add to 17. So we have 31, 17, 13, and 11 if I were to sum up all of those factors. And that tells us we are going to be using 2 and 15. So we know we're going to have binomial factors here. So we're going to have x and x as our variable. And those two numbers are going to create our other terms. So we're going to have x plus 2 and x plus 15. Let's check out another example. We're going to have y squared minus 11y plus 24. So we have to create our factor u for 24. So we have 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. This c operation tells us we're looking for two numbers that add to 11. So let's sum these up. We have 25, 14, 11, and 10. This tells us we're going to be using 3 and 8. So we know we're going to have y and a 3, y and an 8. And then we look at this b operation. It is negative, so we need both of these binomials to have a negative in them. Y minus 3 times y minus 8. How about if I were to factor x squared minus 3x minus 18? I have that factor u for 18 here. I have 1 and 18. 2 and 9, and 3 and 6. This c operation of having a negative tells us we're looking for two numbers that subtract to that middle b value of 3. So I'm going to do some differences here in between 17, 7, and 3. And that tells us we're going to be using 3 and 6. So we know that we have x and 3, x and 6, and 1 is a positive, 1 is a negative to get this negative 18. Well, which one's positive, which one's negative? Let's look at this b value of a negative 3x. That tells me that my higher term needs to be the negative and the lower term the positive. How about if I were to factor y squared plus 4y minus 32? I have my factor u for 32 here. I have 1 and 32, 2 and 16, 4 and 8, and that is it. I'm looking for two numbers that subtract to that b value of 4. So let's do the differences. We have 31, 14, and 4. And that tells us we're going to be using 4 and 8 as our second terms. So we have y and 4, y and an 8. And we know by the c value, one's a positive, one's a negative. Well, which one is which? Our b value is positive, which tells me that after distributing this, if I were to multiply it out, I would want my higher value term to be a positive and the lower to be a negative. Let's factor x squared minus 12x minus 64. And I already have my factor u there on the screen. So I'm looking for two numbers that subtract to this middle b value of 12. So let's do the differences here. We have 63, 30, 12, and 0. This tells us we're going to be using 4 and 16 as our numbers in our binomial factors. And we need to decide which one's positive, which one's negative. Well, I look at that b value being negative, and that's going to tell me my higher number is the negative and my lower is the positive. Let's factor y squared plus y minus 72. I have my factor u, and I'm looking for two numbers that subtract to this middle b value. Now, I don't have a middle b value there explicitly, but I know that this is a coefficient of 1, so I'm looking for two numbers that subtract to 1. So we have 72, 34, 21, 14, 6, and 1. And that tells us we have 8 and 9 as our binomials. So we have y and 8, y and 9. And then this middle b value is positive, and that tells us our higher number is going to be positive. So we would have y minus 8 times y plus 9. Let's check out a couple of more examples here. We have x squared minus 21x plus 80. I am looking for two numbers that add to this middle b value of 21. So let's do some sums here. We have 81, 42, 24, 21, and 18. And this tells us we're going to be using 5 and 16. So we're going to have x and 5, x and 16. And because our middle b value is negative, that tells us that both of these terms have to be negative as well. Those are all the examples we have today for factoring simple trinomials. Make sure you're following us on Instagram and TikTok at 6Minute Math. And be sure to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below for any topic you want to see me tackle in a future 6-minute episode. Always remember that the best way to get math is to practice math. So keep on practicing. And until next time, keep solving and evolving.